Thank you all for coming. My name is Prashanth Nyer, and I'm a professor at Chapman University. I've been involved with this MBA program here with AAU ever since it started back in 2009. So I've been coming to Prague regularly every year. And it's a fun program. It's great fun for me, and I think it's great fun for some of our students. So what I want to do today is to give you a small flavor of the marketing course that I teach. So the topic of this discussion is, how do you determine the value of a customer? Imagine that you own a business. How do you determine the value of a particular customer? Now, this is something that is very important for businesses to know, to understand. Imagine, Alexei, imagine that you own a business. Okay? And your customers come and buy stuff from you. Now imagine that Simone here is one of your customers. He has been buying products from you for the last 20 years. Every year he comes and buys $10,000 worth of products and services from you. $10,000 every year. Now tomorrow he comes to your office and says, Alexei, that's it. I'm not going to buy your product anymore. Okay? So that's the situation. Now imagine that you write him a check for $1. You write him a check for $1 and you tell him, hey, Simone, please continue shopping with me. And maybe Simone gets the check for $1 and he says, okay, I will continue shopping with you. Is that a good investment of $1? If you can get this $10,000 customer by paying $1, that's a great investment of $1. Now imagine another scenario where you write him a check for $100 million and he says, okay, I will continue shopping with you. Is that a good investment of $100 million?
It depends how long he will buy.
Yeah, but maybe not, right? So what we have just established through this simple exercise is that Simone is worth somewhere between $1 and $100 million to you. But in reality, how do we more precisely determine the value of a customer? Right? We need to, as business people, be able to calculate the value of a customer. Because unless you know how much a customer is worth, you will not be able to decide whether to acquire a customer, right? So if you want to go and acquire a customer, you need to have some idea of how much that customer is going to be worth to you. You need to be able to know how much a customer is going to be worth to you in order to determine which customers to prioritize, which customers to focus on, because your time is limited. The amount of resources available to you is limited. You don't have an infinite amount of time and money. So you have to optimize how you spend your money. You have to decide which customers to focus on and which perhaps you don't need to focus on. So you need to determine the value of customers. You need to know how much a customer is worth in order to decide how much money, time, and effort you can spend to retain that customer. You might have a customer like Simone here who might be about to leave you, but perhaps you can win him back if you were to take him out for dinner or buy him or maybe give him a discount. But you need to be able to know how much that customer is worth to you before you can determine how much to spend retaining that customer. So in this brief presentation that we are going to do today, we are going to learn one way. There are many ways, but we will learn one way in which, by which marketers can calculate the value of a customer. So let's use the example of a cable company. Cable company, that's like a television cable company. If you want to watch CNN or the Disney Channel at home, I guess you have to subscribe to a cable company. But if you're not familiar with the concept of a cable company, you could think of a mobile company like Vodafone. So imagine that you work for a cable company. Imagine that you have just entered the Czech market, just entered a new market. So the first thing you have to do is to acquire customers. You have to obtain new customers. So let's say that your firm spends $100,000 on advertising. You spend $100,000 on marketing expenses, and as a result of that, you get 1,000 new customers. By the way, you have these handouts that I've printed for you, so that'll help you do the calculations. So you spend $100,000 on advertising, and you get 1,000 new customers. Now, once you get the 1,000 customers, you have to spend some money, right? Because you have to install cable boxes. You have to pull fiber optic cable from the street into their homes. So that's going to cost you another $40 per customer. Okay? Are you with me so far? So I would like you to tell me what is the acquisition cost per customer. Ramona, could you give him the handout? So what is the acquisition cost per customer?
140.
How much?
140.
140. Excellent, Alexei. The acquisition cost is $140. How did we get that? $100,000 spent on advertising divided by 1,000 customers. So the advertising cost per customer is $100. To that you add the $40 in setup cost per customer, $140. So that is the acquisition cost, the cost to the business of acquiring one customer. So now let's move on to the next slide. Now you have these 1,000 customers. Each customer pays you $500 for the cable service, $500 per year, $500 per year. And let's assume that the payments are received at the end of each year. So if the customer signs up with your business today, their first payment is due 1 year from today, at the end of each year. And we'll also make the assumption that every customer stays with you for the whole year, meaning they sign an annual contract. So nobody is going to leave you partway through the year. Every customer stays with you for the whole year. We're making these assumptions to make the calculations easier to do right now. And we'll also assume that the annual fee, $500, remains the same year after year after year. Again, only to keep the calculation simple. This firm, let's assume, has a 20% operating profit margin. What does that mean? Each customer pays you $500, and from that $500, you have lots of expenses. You have to pay the satellite company, you have to pay for electricity, you have to pay the rent on your buildings, you have to pay your employees. Your profit from the $500 is 20%. So in other words, your operating profit per customer is $100. Of the 1,000 customers that you acquire in year one, only 600 customers continue into year two. Okay, because there is going to be some attrition. So in this particular example, only 600 customers are retained into year two. And of those 600 customers, only 350 continue into year three, and only 100 customers into year four. And none of the original customers continue into year five. Okay? So let's just imagine that this is the scenario that you're facing. Now, there's one more thing. The discount rate is 7%. Discount rate is 7%. Now, I know that some of you are prospective MBA students, so it's possible that you have no idea what this means. So let me quickly explain to you what is meant by discount rate. Now, even if I were teaching my MBA students who have already studied accounting, and therefore they should know this, I explain the meaning of discount rate again because students sometimes forget. And that's one of the great things about this program, in that each course reinforces the knowledge that students have acquired in previous classes. right? So we try to create an environment where you study something in one class, maybe in accounting, and then you use that in the marketing class. And then you take that knowledge and then you study that again in finance. And so your knowledge is being constantly reinforced. So let's talk about discount rate. What's your name?
I'm Scott.
Scott. Scott Cessna.
Yeah.
Oh. So Scott is in the MBA program, but I'm not going to embarrass you by asking you for this. But let's say, Scott, that you borrowed $1,000 from Alexei. Right? This morning you borrowed $1,000 from Alexei, and then right now you have $1,000 in your hand, and you're offering it to Alexei and saying, "Hey, Alexei, I can give you the $1,000 right now, or I can give you this $1,000 10 years from now." Either way, he's going to get $1,000. $1,000 right now, Alexei, or $1,000 10 years from now. Which would you prefer?
No.
$1,000 right now. Why not $1,000 10 years from now?
$1,000 for 10 years will be cost not $1,000.
That's right.
It's now.
The value of money diminishes with time. Value of money diminishes with time. And there are many reasons why the value of money diminishes with time. One, there's inflation. Things are becoming more expensive as time goes by. So $1,000 can buy more now compared to the buying power of the same $1,000 10 years from now. A second reason is, if you get your money right now, you can do whatever you want with that money. You can invest it in the bank, you can invest it in your business, you can go and have a party. It doesn't matter what you do with it. You can do whatever you want with your money. And that's called the opportunity cost. But there's a third reason why getting the $1,000 now is better than getting the $1,000 10 years from now. You know where Scott is right now. He's sitting right next to you. But do you know where he's going to be 10 years from now?
No.
You have no idea. So the risk of not getting paid increases exponentially the longer the time horizon. So for these reasons, the value of money diminishes with time. And the rate at which the rate of value diminishes with time is known as the discount rate. And the way this is used in calculations is using a formula that I'll show you on the next slide. So using the information that's on this screen, we are going to calculate the customer lifetime value. Okay? So before we get into the calculations, I just wanted to show you this equation. Present value. So in this case, Scott is going to give Alexei $1,000. And so that is $P, the payment. Okay, that's the payment you are going to get. The present value of some payment you're going to receive at some point in future is $P, the payment, divided by 1 plus D, where D is the discount rate, expresses a number between 0 and 1. So if the discount rate is 7%, like in this example, D is 0.07. Okay, if the discount rate is 7%, D is 0.07. So 1 plus D to the power of n, where n is a number of years after which you're going to get paid. If you have a smartphone with you, then take it out and we can use it as a calculator because you'll need to do some calculations. Okay, so this lecture, this talk will go a lot more, will be a lot more interesting if you're able to actually do the calculations. So let's just say that Scott is going to give you $1,000 right now. Right now. Now, right now is how many years from now? Right now is how many years from now? 0 years from now. So the present value of $1,000 that you're going to get right now is $1,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 0. $1,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 0. Anything to the power of 0 is 1. So you have $1,000 divided by 1, which is $1,000. So the present value of $1,000 that you're going to receive right now is $1,000. But if you're going to get the $1,000 after 10 years, Scott, can you do that fast? 1,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 10. Can you do powers in your calculator? So let's say Scott says, hey, Alexa, I'll give you $1,000 after 10 years. How much is the present value of that? 1,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 10. $508. That's it. So $1,000 that you're going to receive after 10 years is only worth $508 right now. So clearly, it's better to get the money up front rather than much later. So now that you have relearned how to calculate present value, let's use that information. So you will see a table like this in your handout. And what we are going to do is to use this table to calculate customer lifetime value. Now, as the question already said, in year one, you have 1,000 customers. Of those 1,000 customers, 600 are retained into year two, and of those, 350 into year three, and 100 customers into year four. And none of the original customers continue into year five. The operating profit per customer, as we have already discussed, is 20% of the $500 that they give you. So that's $100 each year. Why? Because we said in the question that the customer pays $500 every year, right? The annual fee is $500 every year. So 20% of $500 remains at $100 each year. So you have the number of customers, you have the operating profit per customer, you multiply these two columns, and you will get the next column. So you have those numbers there. That's the total operating profit that your firm is going to earn each year. Now, when is this money, this $100,000, when is that money received by your firm? A year from now, at the end of the first year, 1 year from now. So you have to calculate the present value of this $100,000. And how do you do that? $100,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 1. Why to the power of 1? Because the money is going to be received 1 year from now. And if you do that calculation, it comes to $93,457.94. Okay? Now, the second year's operating profit of $60,000, when is that received? How many years from now? 2 years from now. So the present value of that is $60,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 2. Now, why are we dividing by 1.07? Because the discount rate in this example is 7%. If the discount rate had been some other number, then the denominator would have been different. So 60,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 2 comes to 52,406. Similarly, you go for year 3. 35,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 3 is $28,570. And then finally, for the last year, $10,000 divided by 1.07 to the power of 4, and that gives you $7,628.95. So you add these four numbers together. Go ahead and add up those four numbers. And you get $182,063. And this is called the net present value. Net present value. The word net in net present value just means sum total of. Sum total of all the present values. So you have present value for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. You add them up and you get the net present value. Now, in order to get this net present value of $182,000, you had to begin with 1,000 customers in year one. Right? With 1,000 customers, you ended up with a net present value of $182,000. So what is the net present value of one customer? You take this number and divide by this number. And how much do you get? $182.06. Now, is this the customer lifetime value? Did it cost your firm any money to acquire these customers? How much was it? $140 per customer, right? So it cost you $140 to acquire each customer. And the operating profit per customer is $182.06. So what is the customer lifetime value? $42.06. Right? So this was not a very difficult calculation. I have made this calculation as easy as possible for students to understand. And there are other ways of calculating customer lifetime value which can get more complicated. But this example, even though it is very simple, it represents how large businesses go about calculating the value of customers. You calculate the acquisition cost. Now, in this example that we looked at, there were only two components to acquisition cost: advertising and the setup cost. In real life, there may be other components to it, but it's simple. It's still very similar. So let's just wrap up this whole exercise by talking about how can customer lifetime value be increased. Customer lifetime value is another measure of the profitability of a firm. The customer lifetime value is just another way of looking at how profitable your business is, because it tells you how much profit you can make from each customer over his or her lifetime. And so the larger the customer lifetime value, the greater will be the profitability for your firm. So we need to know how to increase the value of customers. So the customer lifetime value was calculated by looking at the net present value of the operating profit per customer. And from that, we subtracted the acquisition cost per customer. Right? That's what we did in the previous slide. So in order to increase the customer lifetime value, there are two things you could do. One, you could reduce the acquisition cost per customer. And the other thing you could do is to increase the net present value of the operating profit per customer. But how do you do that? So let's revisit the calculation. When we looked at the, go ahead.
Can I ask, because you had an assumption that first year you will have thousands, there's clients and 600. Where did you get these numbers?
Oh, these are all part of the problem. So I'm saying, assume that this is your business. You have been running this business. You started off year one with 1,000 customers. Let's assume that in year two, of those 1,000 customers, you ended up with 650 and so on. Now you have finished year 5 and you don't have any of those original customers anymore. Now what you're doing is going back and saying how much were each one of those customers worth to you, right? So
But in year 2, 3, 4, I can get some new customers, which are connected with additional acquisition costs, etc.
Right.
But is it?
Does it change the calculation? No. So that's a very good question. What we are doing is we are looking at one cohort of customers, and we are then tracking that group of customers until there are no more customers. And then we are going back and saying how much was each one of those customers worth to you on an average. So what we are doing in this particular method is calculating the value of a customer on an average, because each one of these customers may have a different value. A customer who stays with you for all 4 years is worth more than a customer who stays with you for only 1 year. But in this particular calculation, what we are doing is calculating the average value of a customer. When we go through our class, we'll be looking at other calculations where we even calculate the value of a particular customer. We don't have the time for that today. So this being an introductory talk, we are going to just calculate the average value of a customer. Now your question was, what if you acquire more customers in year 2? That's part of a different cohort of customers. And if you want, you can track those customers until they are all gone, and then you can calculate the value of a customer. Now what you will end up finding is that the value of a customer, the average customer lifetime value, does not change much from cohort to cohort. It pretty much remains steady. But it's a good idea to track it over time. So lots of institutions, for example, DHL, companies like Amazon. Amazon is a company that actually tracks customer lifetime value because they have the resources to do that. Amazon knows exactly how much money I spend with them every year. They know exactly how much money it has cost them to service me as a customer. And so they have the ability to calculate the value of each and every customer. So if I were to call Amazon and tell them, I don't want to pay you my annual fees anymore, because annual fees for Amazon Prime is $75 a year. And I don't want to pay that. And Amazon can look at how much I'm worth to them, and they'll realize that I'm worth a lot more than $75. I'm perhaps worth maybe $10,000 a year to them as a customer, because I buy everything through Amazon. And so they might say, well, do we lose $10,000 in profits, or do we give up $75? Is it okay to give up $75 in annual fees to retain this customer? So by being able to calculate the value of a customer, the firm is able to make decisions of that sort. So in this question, the acquisition cost was calculated as $140. But to do that, we looked at the advertising cost of $100,000. Now what if you could bring down the advertising cost and yet have it be equally effective? So perhaps more persuasive advertising that is less expensive but equally effective. So if you can bring down this cost, then your acquisition cost will come down. Or maybe for the same advertising expense, what if you can get advertising that is more persuasive? So you're able to get more than 1,000 customers. That will bring down the acquisition cost. Or maybe what if you can find somebody who can install the cable boxes for less than $40 per customer? That will bring down the acquisition cost. Coming to the next slide, how do you increase the net present value of operating profit per customer? Again, let's go back to the question. The profit margin for the business is 20%. What if you can tighten the belts and increase the operating profit margin from, say, 20% to 22%? That will increase the net present value of the operating profits. But going back to what you had mentioned, you had 1,000 customers in year 1. What if you are able to retain more of those customers into year 2? Right now, only 600 customers are being retained into year 2. But what if you are able to retain 700 customers into year 2? That means you have 100 more customers paying you $500 that year. So if you can increase your customer retention rate, which is the rate at which you're able to retain customers, then that will greatly increase the customer lifetime value. The discount rate is the one thing that the marketer has no control over. The discount rate is the cost of capital. It's the cost of money. And you as a marketer, you as a business person, you cannot control the discount rate. That is determined by much larger market forces outside of just one entity. But the one thing you can control is you can increase the annual fees. If you can increase the annual fees and not have it affect the retention rate, then that will increase the customer lifetime value. But there's one other thing you can do. Right now, customers are paying at the end of each year. Each customer is paying at the end of each year. What if you could get customers to pay at the start of each year? That would greatly increase the customer lifetime, right? Because instead of the $500 being received at the end of the year, if the customer pays the $500 at the start of the year, then for that year, the money does not get discounted. For the second year, the payment is being received at the start of the second year, not at the end of the second year. So you discount the payment only by 1 year rather than 2, and so on for every following year. So there are many ways in which businesses can increase the customer lifetime value. Now it's important, as I mentioned a few minutes earlier, to understand that not all customers are worth the same. In this particular example, we calculated the average customer lifetime value. In my class that begins tomorrow, and for those of you who are prospective students, Simone and Alexei, you're more than welcome to come and sit in on the lectures maybe tomorrow evening or even Saturday morning. More than welcome to do that. We will go through some other techniques where we learn how to calculate the customer lifetime value of particular individual customers. And it's very important that businesses determine which customers are the really valuable ones. You have to identify your most valuable customers. And identifying your most valuable customers is not that easy. You can't just do it by looking at which customer buys more from me, because revenues are not the same as profits, right? So in the United States, there are major consumer packaged good companies like Procter & Gamble, or there's a company called PepsiCo. All of you have heard of PepsiCo because they make Pepsi, and they make this other product that is very, very popular in the Czech Republic. They make Lay's potato chips. And I see Lay's potato chips everywhere. Like every store I go to, they have Lay's potato chips. So I'm assuming that they're very popular in the Czech Republic. Now, who is PepsiCo's biggest customer? It is Walmart. Walmart, right? Walmart is a retailer and they are PepsiCo's biggest customer. But they are not PepsiCo's most profitable customer. Why? Walmart, because of its huge buying power, is able to squeeze, and I'm tempted to squeeze this bottle, but I'll break it. What Walmart does is that it squeezes its suppliers to razor-thin margins. So PepsiCo might only make maybe 1 or 2 cents in profits per bag of potato chips. That's how thin the profit margins are. So even though Walmart is the biggest customer for PepsiCo, it is not the most profitable customer. So one has to always be careful not to confuse revenue, the size of revenue, with profitability, because these are two different concepts. So identify and then take care of your most profitable customers. Why? Because if you don't take care of your most profitable customers, your competitors will. Your competitors are trying to steal away your most profitable customers from you. So you better take care of them. And as I mentioned, your most profitable customers are not necessarily your biggest customers. Okay? And I believe that was the last slide that I had. So did you have any questions? No? Go ahead. Oh.
Okay. How soon is too soon? When should maybe startup companies start considering to calculate their customer lifetime value?
You can start it right away as soon as you get customers. And these days, lots of firms have customer relationship management software. But even if you are a startup company with just 1 employee, it's easy for you to keep track of the revenues that you're getting from customers. You're able to keep track of the expenses you have for that customer. So calculating the customer lifetime value is something you can begin on day 1. the day you get a customer. In fact, you should start it before you get the customer, because you have to start with the customer acquisition cost. So it is a good idea, especially for startups, because if you go to a bank and say, I want a loan, the bank manager is most likely going to ask you, what is the value of your customer? They're going to need some kind of quantification of the value of your business. And if you're able to tell them, hey, we have done the calculations, this is what an average customer is worth, the bank manager is going to be impressed with you and is far more likely to give you a loan on favorable terms.
Thank you. That was very insightful. I had a question. If you have a marketing campaign and you're targeting 2 customers, and the marketing campaign costs $500, and you're only able to reach one of those customers, so the cost is allocated just to one customer?
Exactly. So even though you're targeting 2 customers or 2,000 customers, if you only get some of those customers to actually become customers, then all of those expenses are then assigned to the customers.
If I target customer A and customer B, and I don't get B, and I just get A, then the acquisition cost is going to be higher, obviously.
Exactly.
And that's changing the valuation though for customer A.
Exactly. It does, but
Based on a customer B, whether what customer B or C or D or E, F doesn't do.
that's right. And so somebody has to pay that expense, right?
Right.
That cost has to be assigned. And so in marketing, this happens all the time, right? You're casting a wide net.
Right.
And you don't catch all the fish in the pond. You only catch some of the fish in the pond. But the cost is then assigned to those fish that you're able to catch. So because the marketing expenses have to be assigned, and so they're assigned to the customers that you acquire.
That's your requirement, so it seems like, you have to.
It looks like, yeah, that's right. So for example, in marketing, we say with television advertising, the cost of one exposure is only a few cents. In the United States, the cost of one exposure, having one person see your ad, is only maybe 5 cents or 10 cents. That's it, that's all. It's that inexpensive, television advertising. But not everyone who sees the ad becomes a customer. So when you're allocating the cost of advertising, what you do is you take all the millions of dollars you spent on advertising and you divide that by the number of acquired customers, not by the number of customers you exposed it to, right? But because you're trying to actually measure productivity.
Because it's making it look like that customer's value is changing when in fact it's not, but it's just the acquisition cost is different because we thought we're going to get that many customers, but in fact it's something different.
Right.
So I think if we should split the acquisition cost and say here is the revenue that we're getting and here is the acquisition cost, and look at it as 2 different things. I mean, what do you recommend?
So, no, I would recommend that you do it the way I went through in class, and there's a reason why it is done this way, and that is that finally, when you look at the customer lifetime value, that is a measure, as I mentioned earlier, of the profitability of the business. And profits equals revenue minus costs. So all the revenues have to be captured, all of the expenses have to be captured. So if you're only taking part of the expenses and say, hey, all of the advertising money that I spent on customer B, who did not become a customer, let's ignore it, then you're not capturing that expense. Right. So all of the expenses have to be captured, just like all of the revenue has to be captured in that equation.
Okay. I'm just trying to get my hands around that
Right.
because it seems like we're trying to include those costs, but is this actually cost that should be for customer? Right? So it's okay.
So it's like this. Let me. I don't know. Do you guys do hunting here in the Czech Republic?
Not here.
Okay, so, but not in California, but there are parts of the United States where people actually go and shoot animals and hunt. So let's say, because people in the Czech Republic are very humane, let's say that you do hunting with bow and arrows, like with a bow and arrows. So let's say you have one bow and 10 arrows, right? And let's say that each arrow costs you $1. And so you go to the forest and you see a deer going by and you shoot it with one arrow, you miss. You shoot with another arrow, you miss. Third arrow, you miss. Apparently you had a little bit of pivo. So you hit the deer with the 10th arrow, right? So it took you 10 arrows to hit the deer.
But it's still the same deer.
It's still the same deer. You get one deer.
It's not a different deer.
No, you.
It's not two different.
Oh yeah, no, there are a bunch of deer, right? And you're trying to shoot. All you need is one deer. So you're shooting at deers. You shoot 10 arrows. You finally get one deer on your 10th arrow. What is the cost per deer? 10 arrows, right? So even though you have shot at many deer, what you're doing is, when I ask you, how many arrows did it cost you to shoot that one deer? It is 10 arrows, right? Even though maybe you only shot 2 arrows at that particular deer.
But if I had two different deers, I would say, well, I'm going after 2 different deers, or I went after a deer, and I went after a pig, or I went after something else. So I should allocate it as in different groups.
So let's say now that you are selling the deer. Okay, you sell the deer for $20, right? You sell the deer in the market for $20. What was your expense? Is it 2 or is it $10? You only shot 2 arrows at this particular deer that you shot, but you shot 10 arrows in total. So what's your profit for today? Is it $18 or is it $10? Is it $20 minus $2 or is it $20 minus $10? You spend 10 arrows, right? So your expense would be $10. So that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make.
And if I could follow with one more question on something different. It makes sense, like if you have customers and you're thinking about acquiring them, but if you parachute into a situation and you already have the customer, because this is something, like what would you recommend for that?
Right, so as I mentioned, there are many
Because
ways
it's a sunk cost.
Right.
And a sunk cost, we should not.
But very good. So as I mentioned earlier, this is one way of calculating customer lifetime value. Later this week, Scott and his classmates are going to be exposed to other ways of calculating customer value. And one of them is called customer future value. So just like you said, you already have a customer. You already have many customers. All of the expenses that you have already incurred is a sunk cost. All of the profits that you have already earned from this customer, that's all history.
So
that's all history. So now you look at the customer future value, which is how much more profits can you make from this customer. In business, we are not terribly sentimental, right? Somebody could have been your customer for 100 years, but if they are not going to be profitable anymore, you should treat them just like a customer who has been with you for 1 year and is not going to be profitable anymore. So you only look at the future value of the customer. And so you ignore any past profits or any past expenses that you may have incurred from that customer. And so that's another way of doing the calculations. And so Scott and others will be exposed to that in the coming days. Yeah.
When you do the future value, you have to make various assumptions about what's going to happen.
Exactly. So very good. So when you're calculating the value of a customer that you already have, you're trying to project into the future. So you have to know how long this customer is going to be with you. Alex, so you had briefly mentioned that, right? You said something like, oh, it depends on how long the customer is going to be with you. And so there are ways of doing that. And one way of doing that is by conducting a survey of that customer. By, in fact, asking the customer, how likely are you going to stay with us next year? Not how likely are you going to stay with us for 10 years, but you ask the customer, how likely are you to renew your contract with us next year? And then,
it's foreseeable future. It's still
no, it's just for the next year.
Yeah.
That's all you do. So once you calculate, once you know the likelihood of customer retention, let's call it, let's assume it's 70%. The customer says, I'm 70% likely to stay with you next year. Then you can calculate how many more years the customer is likely to be with you into the future. Because what we assume is the customer is 70% likely to be with you next year. If the customer comes with you next year, he or she is going to be 70% likely to be with you the following year, and so on. And there's a simple formula, 1/1 minus CR minus 1.
This is the thing, because as you were telling us these numbers, 1,600. So there is some probably trend,
Right. These are numbers that I just made up because I wanted to keep the calculation relatively simple. But in other situations, what a marketer does is the marketer calculates the customer retention rate. So for example, Chapman University, I teach a lot of courses at the undergraduate level as well as the graduate level. So at the undergraduate level, Chapman University has something like a 95% customer retention from year 1 to year 2. And that is a very important measurement for universities, undergraduate universities. The first year retention rate, meaning the percentage of students that are retained from year 1 to year 2. And that is the most problematic year, because this is a year when students come to a university and they realize, oh, I don't like this university. I'm too far away from my parents. Oh, my girlfriend went to some other city. I want to be with her. So the customer retention rate, the student retention rate from year 1 to year 2 typically is lower. Once you retain a student into year 2, then they are very likely to stay with you in year 3, 4, etc. So Chapman University has a very high customer retention rate going from year 1 to year 2. And then it's even higher than 95% going from year 2 to year 3, year 3 to year 4. So we have calculated our historical customer retention rate, and we monitor that each year. So, and businesses do that. Amazon does that. Companies like Facebook and others, they have good measurements of their customer retention rates, and then they use that in calculating customer lifetime value. Any other questions?
Discount rate. You said that the company does not have any control over it, which is not completely true, because you can play with.
That's true. What I meant to say is that from the perspective of a marketing course,
Okay.
We treat the discount rate as a constant, as a given. Since when we get into fields like corporate finance, then you understand that the discount rate can be manipulated. But from the perspective of a marketing manager, we treat that as a constant, as a given, because it makes more sense that way. Okay, so that's it as far as my presentation goes. Thank you all for coming, and for those of thank you. And for those of you who are prospective students, I welcome you once again to come and sit in on some of my classes. The earlier classes, the ones tomorrow and the one on Saturday. In fact, if you're coming, come to the class tomorrow, because Saturday is going to be a continuation of that. And after that, it makes less sense because we start getting into case analyses, and you might not be able to follow the thread of the discussion. But you're more than welcome to come and attend the class tomorrow evening.